Peters a little bit more in detail. I mean, I understand, right, why it's impossible for somebody to just instantaneously believe that I'm telling the truth without doing any research about what's gone on in this country, history, anything that I'm talking about. And I also know I can only show so much in a limited period of time. So I'm hoping, I suppose, in creating enough curiosity to uncover what's going on in this country in order for the people of this country to become aware enough to fight for our freedoms before it's too late. Not just our freedoms, but our lives. Now, a couple of things I want to point out about what he says that I think some people would miss otherwise is that when he goes, well, what evidence do you have that your wife poisoned you? And I told him about the urine samples and the hair samples, and also that he didn't understand that even my existing tissues and hair samples on my own body, probably still have, trace elements of what was done to me. But regardless, when he said that they wouldn't be admitted, my question, to him is, and any reasonably minded individual, do you really think that if I actually can produce urine samples that show the compounds, not just somebody adding it to urine, but having been processed in the body, of poison, that it wouldn't be admitted just on the basis that maybe there isn't skin or cells within the urine or hair in the urine proving that it was mine or this or that? In other words, perfectly sterile collection, which I seriously doubt, right? In other words, I'm sure it can be linked to me. But regardless, just on the pure, rationale as to how I could possibly find somebody willing to ingest rat poison and give me their urine. You see what I'm saying? It's illogical, man. The conclusions and his arguments that it's basically he's already psychologically determined that, I'm not believable, so he's not even going to help me. When I specifically asked him, where does a person go when law enforcement, in his town or municipality and across state lines have joined together and committed crimes against him? Where does a person go when, FBI federal agents that happen to be buddies with the local authorities and drink in their sports bars and everything else intentionally cover up those crimes, so when somebody tries to go to a higher authority to get an investigation done, they can't get it done? It would have been so hard for him. I mean, my direct question is, would it have been so hard for him, since I told him, I couldn't, every time I tried to get any legal help, whether it was a personal attorney or law firm, or whether it was going to, medical lab specialists and asking them, or trying to admit myself to hospitals, that I kept being met with the same skepticism, so I couldn't even get the samples tested. When he's a US federal prosecutor, would it have been so hard for him, to order, just the tests of the samples that I'd saved, so that I could at least come back to local authorities, like say, we follow his claim, okay, that the homicide attempt started in Washington, so I needed to just strictly be in Washington. And even though they crossed state lines, and even though there was obvious collusion and corruption within, other hospitals here that helped cover up what was done to me and prevented me from being able to get medical treatment. Let's just say it's an epidemic of pure ignorance that I'm just suffering from, which is horrible in and of itself, right? And again, it goes back to the ties of what's happened to our education system. But let's just say it's all separate. When we've got cops across both lines committing crimes together. In other words, my now ex boasted not only screwing cops within the Sandpoint and Bonner County, but some of them, some of these skinhead Aryan superior, officers within Spokane that were friends of Nags also participated in the sex scandal, to put it politely, right? Basically covering up and letting basically a murderer, and a cruel one at that uses poison, go free, enable her to rob me of the better part of my estate, and also leave the mass murderers in the hospitals go free, all because the cops themselves are sex offenders. So here, what I'm getting at is, let's just say it's not all government controlled, cover up and discrediting and so on and so forth, which after everything that I've looked at going on in our country, it absolutely is. But let's just say that individually there's this epidemic, man, of so much personal greed and corruption that unfortunately for me, it's truly life-threatening, not only from the spouse I married trying to murder me for the life insurance, but then the doctors trying to murder me for their portion of the life insurance and illegal organ harvesting. Then the cops going, hell, man, this woman's guilty and stuff, and we can just blackmail her for sex. And to think that that's not done when it's already been busted in this country and around the world numerous times, man, is people's just wishful thinking. So, I mean, the bottom line is that unfortunately for me, there's so much personal greed and corruption that those things have had the effect of conspiratorially against me suffering. And when I say that it's not planned necessarily, in other words, the personal greed of, and corruption within government that causes, FDA-approved drugs that, I mean, again, the pharmaceuticals, if they don't put the agents there, pay the agents or bribe them to approve for profits, then they illegally market to doctors to push them and so on and so forth. The brainwashing of the public. Pfizer was just fined $2.3 billion for doing these things. Now, did those fines help the hundreds of thousands that have died and that are suffering because of all the, as far as I'm concerned, illegal substances put on the market through these colossal giants? And then for me to have to sit in front, of basically an ignorant, so-called doctor, that only knows so much about their profession and only what they were brainwashed into believing in their education as truth. And me to have to sit there and go, look, in violation of my First Amendment, in violation of my constitutional rights, I'm losing my freedom. And when I point out, that they're wanting to push pharmaceuticals that, have already been class action lawsuits for having killed so many people on me and so on and so forth, that I consider it an act of aggravated assault, if not attempted homicide on my life. And they call that paranoid or delusional when they themselves obviously have not done the research involved. And then furthermore, because of my knowledge that the Holy Bible is in fact the Word of God, and I've scientifically proven it to people, and anybody who says otherwise obviously wasn't paying attention to my dissertation. The Holy Bible is scientifically proven as the Word of God irrefutably. And it's like, so when the Word of God says that pharmaceutical medications would deceive the whole world, and they're trying to push a substance upon me that I don't want to take based not only on health reasons and health and safety reasons of my life, which is, should be a completely reasonable response, I then get falsely accused of being paranoid when it's like I've got scientific evidence that these substances have resulted in an inordinate amount of deaths and permanent brain damage and permanent organ damage, just like the warnings say. When our government approves those things, that to me shows complicity of the eugenic fascism and satanic, occult ties that are so clearly linked in our history now, especially since World War II. Clearly evident as it's ushering in the New World Order in this nation. So I, a student of prophecy, and also divinely connected by the Spirit of God, receiving straight revelation and trying to speak to people that are so ignorant they're life-threatening for me, and actually a part of this corruption, whether they want to believe it or not, having been brainwashed and bribed and given kickbacks and bonuses by the pharmaceutical industry. So, my question to Mr. Peters is, would it have been so difficult when I asked, where does a person go when the criminals are the authorities that we're supposed to be, seeking, protection from against such crimes, and they are, in fact, the ones committing those said crimes? And he could have, referred me to competent individuals he'd worked with in the past. Could have, to at least done some preliminary investigations of my allegations. But whenever he'd ask me, okay, what crime do you think involves a US prosecutor, he would systematically, as soon as I would say, okay, well, the authorities have committed crimes, he'd go, I find that hard to believe. So I'd already told him one example of why his office should be involved, and then he would just dismiss it. And then I would say it crossed state lines. That's another reason why a federal U.S. prosecutor should be involved. And then I told him that the FBI threatened for me when I came forward to present evidence of these allegations. Threatened. In other words, he's saying I need to go to the FBI to do the investigative report, and I said I did, and they threatened to lock me up. So he could have then referred me to people that he had worked with, or he could have at least taken a look at, some of the evidence to see, rather than just automatically jumping on the bandwagon. It's like, oh, this guy must be mentally ill. Then furthermore, I started saying that I witnessed, hospital homicides not only done against me personally in 2 different states, but that were being done to others. I mean, in this state, in the state of Idaho. And he just automatically dismissed. In other words, he would ask why I was there, and I was telling him, and he would systematically, every time, man, just dismiss out of hand any, responsible action. And this has been my problem as I go from, whether it's health and human services or civil rights in both states or governors or whatever. Everybody nowadays does not want to do anything. I shouldn't say everybody, but there's a lot of lazy people now, and that systematically shift responsibility rather than doing their jobs. So it's not just, the fact that our products and services have gone downhill, affecting our economy, and again, all due to the lie of evolution. And again, this is all the systematic takeover of this country. Now, what I'm saying to somebody that knows nothing about history and has not studied any of these topics, it sounds absolutely paranoid. But when people actually take a look at and can clearly see that I'm telling the truth with just, even a day or two of research. Again, I've been doing this now for years, but the more in depth you get, the more you understand this is not paranoia at all. It's actually what's going on in this country. And when I present that there are family members, firsthand, witnesses that we have satanic influences operating now in our government and in the military, and they're coming forward as whistleblowers, and people still ignore, firsthand testimony, like myself, eyewitness testimony that has survived these things. It's infuriating. At least for people that have a conscience and are trying to ensure public safety. So you can hear him, constantly when he would ask me, just dismiss out of hand, why I was there and the help I was trying to get. And furthermore, when he would send me, saying, well, you just need to go to Washington, it's the same bureaucratic nightmare runaround I've been getting the whole time. His office for me was the last stop before I, am now doing what I'm doing, which is openly petitioning, because I'd already in writing petitioned all these offices, including the one that I went to in person, just to see if they were even getting my complaints, because I found it unbelievable that nobody would at least contact me. So I'm going to go all over again, in my attempt to plead to local authorities at first to investigate each of these things separately. And if people don't want to believe there's a tie, that's up to them. But it will eventually come out if people are honest enough that there is absolutely a tie when we've got people being murdered in hospitals all across the country to our existing government at higher levels, which is a tie to the satanic influences going on in this country, which is a tie to the ushering in of the New World Order according to prophecy. I just don't want to see it in this nation. I frankly don't want to see it in the world. And frankly, I'm somewhat upset with my fellow believers that think that we should just fold our hands and sit back and all let it happen without raising our voices or so much as even a little scuffle, against the devil along the way, right? We're not supposed to just be, kicking back and say, "Go ahead, devil and stuff," do your damnedest. No, we're supposed to be fighting. And this is a fight for the everlasting destiny of souls. And people are headed fast to the flames. And as far as I can tell, there has not been a serious effort, man, to prevent the takeover of this nation like there should be, when it's going to involve directly your personal health and safety. If Satan arises in this country, look what happened, the last time he manifested in Nazi Germany. And if you don't think Christians were in there, man, you're obviously, not aware of Corrie ten Boom's family and her story. Christians were being swept up into the camps too, the true believers, man, that felt it incumbent to shelter, God's, at least one of his tribes, and help the persecuted people that were being slaughtered. So, frankly, I cannot understand the deafening silence at such a time as this from the church, when basically what should be happening is every time our government, man, does openly, persecute us, which is what's happened in my case, that the rest of the body of Christ doesn't stand in the streets, man, and say, that's enough. We demand the arrest of these criminals. We demand the arrest of all those abusing power and authority in this country immediately. I mean, listen how this guy just systematically, every time I would say why I was there, just laugh or come up with some excuse why not to help me.
Doctors joined in, and my wife and the authorities basically sent me to our authorities that brought these people in Bonner County, friends, sent me to the mental section of Treaty Medical Center under North Idaho Behavioral Health, telling me that there was a Wilson's expert there that would finally run the test that I couldn't get run. So were you in the hospital on a mental hold? An administrative hold, a mental hold? I don't know, when were you in there as a mental patient? Yeah, but they tricked me. They said, sign this paperwork, or you won't be able to see a Wilson's expert, and so on and so forth. So I signed this paperwork, thinking I'm finally going to get to see a doctor that's going to
kidnap me by deception.
I couldn't get that wrong. And it turns out that I was leading myself into the mental part of the hospital.
I got to add something here. We have an entire culture, man, where, mass millions of people have murdered their own babies, man. Literally committing violent acts against defenseless infants. And we've got an entire culture where we've got, pedophiles, man, marching in the streets, man, demanding their rights to screw little boys and girls. And we've got an entire culture, man, of smut, man, so severe that some people are performing bestial acts. We've got an entire culture, man, of offenses so great, man, that it's psychologically traumatizing and actually life-threatening for many. We've got an entire culture that's become so greedy, man, that innocent people end up behind bars while, murderers go free, man, depending on if they can pay out the judges and so on and so forth. What I'm getting at is my life, my freedom for the rest of my life, and my health was being personally threatened by just allegations with no crimes having been committed, no acts of violence, no nothing. And yet we have, as far as I can tell, mass millions of people that truly are life-threatening, that have harmed people, that have harmed even the very most innocent among us. And they're all free. And these are doctors, man, are, all for giving permanent brain-damaging and organ-damaging substances, and even substances that have been proven now to cause death. And just because they're FDA approved doesn't mean these things are, in any sane culture, in any culture that was actually law-abiding and actually cared about life, something that you should ingest. So all I'm getting at is, as far as I'm concerned, the real danger was the people I was sitting across from. They were the ones that have, actually done aggravated assaults against people. I hadn't done any crimes. And my life and liberty was in serious jeopardy, and is to this day, because of this culture now that basically is leaving, murderers and mass murderers and so on and so forth run free. and ignoring all the whistleblowers, and ignoring all the godly people saying, keep the Ten Commandments in our public schools. In fact, I saw, like I said, with my own eyes, it was documented on TV on the same day cops were escorting, NAMBLA marchers half naked and crazed, man, demanding their rights to screw little boys and girls. They were arresting grandmas and grandpas, man, like women and men like 60, 70 years old, for quietly holding a sign and picketing in front of, our Capitol and schools, saying keep the Ten Commandments in our public schools. That's what this nation has come to. It's already seriously threatening true Christians, man's liberties and our lives. And man, this is a serious wake-up call to all the people out there that are thinking that it's like, oh, this is still a free nation. Man, this is the time. This generation needs to rise up and keep the devil out of this country. I mean, I can't believe how I watch the History Channel and they sit there and pretend like they haven't found Sodom and Gomorrah and all these things. The Pillars of Solomon marking the crossing, the chariot wheels of Pharaoh and his that were destroyed in the Red Sea, drowned in the Red Sea, just like the scriptures say. Mount Sinai, all of it actually exists. Noah's Ark, all these things have been found, man, historically proven. These are not just fantasy stories. I mean, people want to think. This is reality, a historical fact. And I'm not wanting to see this country, man, burn. So, when I speak harshly against a lot of the perversions going on in this nation, and when I'm deeply concerned when politicians, man, are embracing homosexuality, it's not because I'm like homophobe or this or that or anything like that. It's quite the contrary. I'm like, basically afraid of divine wrath and judgment if we accept what God has said do not do. When He has already left for us incinerated cities with brimstone pellets throughout for us all on the whole planet to see. That's not the path you go down. When He says don't do it, He means don't do it. But I just can't believe, man, how, when each and every one separately of what's happened to me, each and every one of the events, spouses, man, are murdered for life insurance, man. It's a historical fact. Those things happen, right? Illegal organ harvesting is well documented all over the world, In other words, every one of the things that I've suffered from personally is actually documented as current and historical events. So it's not like, okay, people don't want to think about those things, but people don't want to believe that somebody could have survived, through it all, having gone from one, homicide attempt to another homicide attempt to sexual corruption in law enforcement and threats by those wanting to cover up all these things. And I'm saying I have, and it's only because of God Almighty, but to make the people alert as to how depraved our nation has become due to the worship of money and just downright dumbing down of the populace through the lie of evolution in our public schools. And the whole reason why we have a Constitution is to protect, life and liberty. And yet somebody can just say they're afraid of you now, and you can be locked up for life. No crime having been committed. Listen to what he says right here.
Showing I had elevated liver transplant. In other words, my liver was
So here he says the story's going every which way. He's asking me why would his office be involved, and I'm telling him straight up, because there are hospital homicides occurring within the state that I've personally witnessed, and serious torture, aggravated assaults on individuals that are innocent by physicians, and law enforcement wouldn't do anything. Local authorities wouldn't do anything. The FBI threatened me, and I was there in his office, pretty much as a last resort after having contacted, all the medical review boards in all the states, after having contacted all of our state personnel, all the way up to the governor's office, and after having gone to the U.S. Attorney General, even in Washington, D.C., after having gone through the entire executive branch, man, civil rights departments, health and human services departments, about everything going on that I personally witnessed. And I was there saying that, look, I know that his office is not an investigative or law enforcement facility. But you go to the prosecutors when the law enforcement, departments are corrupt. They have the ability to investigate corruption. At least they have the ability to coordinate an investigation of corruption within law enforcement. Yes, they do. So I was there saying, look, I want to be connected to, those who are connected with your office that you've worked with, that are trustworthy, to help me get these people locked up. And instead, every time I would mention why I was there, what crimes were being committed that his office would have jurisdiction over, he would just automatically start with comments like that. Oh, this story's going nowhere. Oh, you're mentally ill. Oh, whatever excuse. Every time I would get directly to the point, he would make an excuse why not to act upon my allegations, and or at least ask for further evidence of my allegations, some type of substance that he could, personally view. And I'm upset with the individual. I mean, again, I understand that psychologically why people have the same reaction he had. So I had to be patient with it. It's unfortunate for me that I understand that psychologically people automatically revert to that for their own, feeling of personal safety. But it doesn't really help, man, get criminals locked up to effect a real and true security. So when I tell him about the crimes, he just automatically started to slander and insult me with no evidence whatsoever.
And I know you don't want to believe that this could possibly happen, but yet people were checking in the hospitals and ending up dead, not checking out. And it was, who does a person go to see about to get that investigated? Well, that's not why you're here. That is why you're
So in other words, there it was. I was telling him why I was there, and that his office had jurisdiction, and he was just saying, well, that's not why you're here. And even though I was saying, absolutely, that is exactly why I'm here. I frankly was so angry, man. If I had shown my anger, in a US prosecuting attorney's office, I could have ended up locked up. I shouldn't have had to defend myself with legal representation right there, to sit there and have to suffer through, a person that's supposed to be representing public safety, insulting the shit out of me, and not following at all. And especially when I had evidence for him to look at. But this is why they're getting away with these crimes, is because the people that are supposed to be serving to protect us, instead of honestly helping people that come forward and report crimes, this is the systematic crap we go through. And it goes for people like even rape victims. They go into law enforcement and they get the systematic bullshit runaround. You realize thousands of rape cases, man, every year go unsolved, namely because the cops don't do a damn thing to solve them. And why? Because there's so much corruption. There's so between law enforcement being one of the highest, cases for domestic violence, including assaults and sexual assaults, even on their own spouses. In other words, basically, it's like we're having to go to criminals, that are supposed to be actually men and women of integrity, that are supposed to be preserving law and order in this country for help. So at this point, I'm going public because basically our nation has reached an all-time low of degradation and depravity. There's such a lack of honor and integrity that I'm having to openly plead publicly because I know not all men and women in uniform and not all federal agents and not all of our politicians are corrupt. I don't know how to get to those decent ones any other way but to go public. And if we can't, in other words, by me going public, I should be able to expose the level of corruption if I can't get any honest, decent men and women of integrity now to investigate these crimes on a local level, if I can't get it on a federal level. By going public and saying, okay, just start in Washington about my allegations. And when that's proven that I've been telling the truth and those people are arrested, and then look, at the law enforcement allegations. Go ahead and look at it all separately. I don't care how these people get locked up behind bars for public safety. And I don't care if people don't believe, and actually I do because it's true, that on a federal level we have entrenched corruption that is covering up serious eugenic practices. And if you don't believe it, look at how many babies are slaughtered every year in this country. Now, no matter how we fight for life and fight for the innocent life, is still executed. Look at all the drugs being approved that have caused death. Look at all the additives and preservatives that are still on the market that cause an unacceptable amounts of prolonged suffering and deaths. Look at the deregulations of environmental controls regarding the air we breathe. And then, if you really start looking at it, the testing of biochemical agents on military, the testing even of biochemical agents over populations, where it's been documented, planes spraying people rather than crops. It goes on and on and on and on. That this country, man, has some very sick practices. And even when they're trying to get, new drugs approved, they put ads in papers for the poor guinea pigs, man, to come on in, and they pay them a couple. I know because I was one. When I was unemployed and had no other means of making money. So you go in and they give you these drugs. You don't know what the hell they're going to do to your body. Not really. You're taking these pills and then they monitor, Some are given placebo effects or whatever, to see if, if there's any true or real lasting benefits. So they experiment on the poor, of the country. But to have to deal when, we're trained as citizens that when we're witnesses of crimes, we're to go to the authorities and then have to have the authorities, man, sit there and insult the shit out of you and not help you at all, man, with regards to, at least looking at the evidence. Now, it would have been one thing if I had no evidence at all of my allegations. Nothing. But when they wouldn't even look at the evidence, and when I'd ask, okay, where does a person in my situation go when you go to the police and they happen to be the criminals? When you go to the FBI and there's corruption there too? Where does the person go to arrest the criminals that are within law enforcement? Now, surely the US Prosecutor, I figured, has worked over the years with men and women of integrity that he could have referred me to, that are highly knowledgeable. But he wouldn't do that.
And tell me what I had to listen to. Well, I'm trying to save people's lives. That's really the bottom line. I'm not trying to make a dollar. I'm not trying to get rich. I'm losing everything I've worked for the past 40 years of my life trying to fight these crimes. And I keep coming across skepticism that wouldn't even allow me to submit the proof that I've acquired.
Including this. I know the guy doesn't do investigations, but he sure has worked in his office with people that do. And that's why I was there, because I didn't know where to go anymore. I'd gone everywhere I could think of that you're supposed to go to save people's lives. See? He says, so far I haven't come close. But every time I would talk about, crimes he would have jurisdiction over, he would just go, well, this story isn't going anywhere, or you're mentally ill, or making an excuse why not to do his job, why the crimes I was talking about, he definitely had jurisdiction over. And that's been exactly the same response no matter what office I've gone to, is that, well, that's not our responsibility, and that's not our, I mean, I can't believe it. Whether it's local authorities saying, well, if it's doctors committing, homicides and there's cover-up across state lines, well, then you need to go to federal authorities. And federal authorities going, well, if there's been attempted homicides, you need to go to local authorities. And it's been nothing but this, for years now, just run around, of people that don't want to do anything, that they're friggin' lazy and ignorant and incompetent and unprofessional. And I'm asking publicly, because I know that not everybody in this country is that way, for the people on a federal level in law enforcement that are aware of the massive corruption now going on in this nation, how life-threatening it is and how freedom-threatening it is, to come forward. And even for the ones that in the hospitals, that of doctors and nurses that are aware that people are dying in, I wouldn't say mysterious ways, but ways that they know were illegal. I'm asking for people to stand up now. Stand up. Stop being afraid of the government. If they come and threaten you, like the people that I know that they told that I was a terrorist or a drug addict here locally, when I've tried to explain that these things are going on for their own personal safety, to try to increase public awareness here locally that there's mass murderers that I can't get arrested right here in their local hospitals. Well, when I have done this, the same agents that have gone around and constantly, and including messing with my mail. There's been federal offenses being committed by federal authorities, man. They'll flash a badge and they'll open up packages and claim that it's, it's for whatever, inspecting a terrorist package for bombs or anything to violate, man, federal laws, man. These people, man, will stop at nothing to cover up their crimes, man. So at any rate, when I tried to explain all this openly, I'm publicly pleading to the people that have been threatened by law enforcement officers that have been threatened by federal agents, not to come forward with the truth of what you know about everything they've been doing, including the fact that, whole groups of cops were screwing my ex during this time in orgies at her house, which enabled her to get away with these crimes. And this is neighbors and other witnesses that had driven by and other people that know this was going on in families and so on and so forth. Try not to look at this like, no, this is just an ex-convict that's going to end up dead, who cares about an ex-convict, right? Try to look at this as factually what it is, that millions of innocent Americans end up dead every year because the rest of us don't stand up. Millions of innocent Americans end up tortured and enslaved behind bars or in mental wards or wherever, because these people are either so ignorant or so brainwashed or so sadistic and cruel. In other words, this isn't just about one person. This isn't about, just letting this ex-convict be assassinated or murdered or ridiculed or mocked or slandered or discredited. This is about government becoming so corrupt and so controlling that they can systematically target any citizen they want and torture, abuse, murder, steal from, rob, take their personal properties, and none of us can defend ourselves individually against entire groups or numbers. Now I can, in God and Christ, call for judgment, and I am going to leave judgments in Yahushua's mighty name. Some of the judgments that the world has not been aware of, but will become aware of in the future, is if you're raping, robbing, pillaging, plundering as governing officials upon your own citizens, you're going to lose your genitals, and you're going to go blind, And if you curse God, then you're going to die and burn in hell. I'm not even going to pull any punches about that. That's where you're headed. If you actually, when you lose your genitals and go blind over these excessive offenses of raping little boys and girls and killing men and raping their wives, etc., all this evil, seriously evil crap going on in the world now. If you actually repent, then when God in His mercy sends such a judgment that is so apropos to what you've been doing, then, and by asking Him not only for forgiveness, but to give you His Spirit and strength so you never ever do those things again, no matter what, then He will give you strength, and then He will also restore either any appendage that has been removed or withered, rotted, including even if it's your eyeballs within their sockets. Divine judgments and miracles are going to be occurring that are apropos. If you're the type of man or woman that smacks and beats, it's one thing to spank, your sons or daughters, man. Frankly, you should be raising them in the Word of God so much so that that's virtually unnecessary. But for their own betterment, when they don't listen again and again and again and repeat the same offense, and you're forced to a corporal, again, not permanent injuring thing, but the butt connected to the brain straight through the spine, to send a little pain message to say, when you do that, afterwards make sure you take your children, hold them and hug them and ask them never to disobey you again. Because when you ask them to do something, tell them straight up that that they might learn that there is right and wrong, and that there is reward for doing good and consequences for doing evil. That when you ask them to do something, it is for their own good, and that when they grow up and they're no longer with you, people won't just spank them on the butt, they'll lock them up, and they'll do unmentionables to them. In other words, people won't care about them then. In other words, let them know that you really beg of them not to do things that force you to have to spank them because of how much it hurts you and because of how much you love them. Hug them and let them know that even though you had to discipline them, that it doesn't mean that they're not loved, that you don't love them. Hug them, hold them, tell them you love them, and ask them to please do what you ask, because what you ask of them is to teach them right from wrong, and it has a reason and a purpose. And make sure when you discipline, following the disciplinary action, you ask them to please not force you to do that again, because of how much it hurts you, because of how much you love them. And hug them, hold them, kiss them, reassure them that they weren't hurt because you hate them. They were disciplined because of what they did, and it has nothing to do with how much you actually really do love them. That love is there and forces you to discipline them for their own good. But when you don't hug them afterwards, little kids can start thinking that they're hated and that you're being abusive because, you're angry or this or that or something. So make sure when you discipline, you also let them know that it was because you actually love them and care about them and want them to end up in a good way. But if you're the type that just beats the crap, literally, slugs hits your spouse, abuses, then in Yahshua's mighty name, the appendages that you're using for evil and wrongdoing and hurting innocent life are going to start to wither or become unusable. These judgments are spoken over all the earth. And it's not so that you're permanently handicapped and can't provide for your family anymore. It's so that you'll learn not to destroy what God has made, not to beat on what God has made, not to maltreat His sons and daughters in all the world, and especially innocent little kids. If you're one of those types that gets off on abusing little kids, man, judgments are on your life right now and henceforth until Christ returns. Knock it off. If you know that you're that type of person, I suggest you immediately, on bended knee or prostrate yourself before the Almighty and ask His forgiveness, that He doesn't smite you, that He doesn't beat on you, and say, change my wicked heart and my evil tendencies. Remove this, unrighteous anger that causes me to lash out against those I love and care about, actually, if that be the case. Send far from me this assaultive spirit forever, O God. Let it never be a part of my life again. Instead, let your Spirit abide in and upon me always, giving me self-temperance, the ability to control my emotions and exercise them in a positive way. Anger and righteous indignation is fine to feel, but it should cause us to do godly actions. It should bring us to do righteously, to meet the excessive evil with excessive righteousness. So please, stop doing these things. If you will repent then, once you lose the use of your arms or legs or however you're striking your victims, if you repent then of that great evil, then I ask that God restore unto you the use, that you may provide for your family and loved ones and for yourself. Stop abusing, especially innocent little children that cannot defend themselves, or the weaker or fair sex. When you have arguments, open up the Holy Bible and pray together and ask God to be the mediator to resolve the differences. Most arguments are caused when one or both, and most of the time both, are out of God's will and are not practicing His commandments with one another, submitting to one another in love, walking side by side. As it's often been said, Eva or Eve was not taken from Adam's head that she should rule over and control him, nor was she taken from Adam's foot that it should be the other way around, that men should completely dominate their wives, but instead from the rib closest to his heart, that she's loved and cherished, and walk side by side, plays an equal part in the decisions of the household. Now ultimately, God made us just a skosh taller in general, because ultimately, when there's two that just can't, for some reason, even with God helping, not agree, then ultimately she's supposed to defer to the lunkhead to make the final decision. And after all things have been weighed out, and guess what happens when we make a decision that turns out wrong? We know that God has imbued her with an awesome memory of every little detail. Every little part of that conversation is fed back to us the next time around. And if we have any sense, we might weigh a little bit stronger her advice, eh? Right? The battle of the sexes goes on. We're supposed to complete one another and help one another. So what is this constant fight between the masculine and feminine? We're supposed to come together. It's not supposed to be a battle. It isn't. In my case, it has cost me, because I would not absolutely compromise the values taught in the Scriptures under any circumstances. No way. No one's going to take the place of God, not even the love of my life by my side. And without Him being number one, man, there's just going to be no real and lasting marriage or relationship. It's not going to happen. It's only God's eternal love that's going to enable it to go on and on. At any rate, I say again to Mr. James Peters, office, was it too hard, to work with associates out of the labs I'm sure he's worked with in cases, because he talks about some cases that involve doctors that he has prosecuted, and nurses. So in other words, individually these crimes if I had just, one at a time, or if I had been, just systematically, automatically about money, rather than my first and chiefest concern was that murderers were loose, I went straight to the police. If I just instead had gone like he keeps suggesting to a tort action, then maybe it could have evolved into a criminal action, maybe. But my case was that the longer that would have taken, right, fighting the, armies of attorneys that doctors and hospitals have, and to eventually prove that was done, if I could have proven, in a reasonable fashion, which again I have proven to anybody with eyeballs that does any medical research, that these things have happened to me. Finally got in a civil thing. Well then, on a criminal level, right, to bring authorities in afterwards, after who knows how many years would have elapsed, and or a possible settlement, how many people settle out of court and just conclude that it was not, like he wants to keep, everybody that's decent has this naive, trusting thing about people not being that evil or corrupt, right? Not being mass murderers for organs or profit, or because they consider themselves so superior to everyone else to just think they can get away with murder endlessly, right? They don't go into the mentality of what a mass murderer is like. They don't go into the mentality of what a psychopath is like. So when a decent citizen comes forward to another decent citizen that's in, like this case, the prosecutor's office or law enforcement, they systematically want to believe that their type of thinking is the same as these people that are committing these crimes. In other words, that it was accidental, that it was malpractice, that it was not intentional. I mean, it's another psychological defense. And instead, you got to start looking at the overwhelming statistics of how many people die, man, by hospital-caused deaths every year. And it's not just accidental. Especially when, like I said, nationally recognized coroners prove, man, that it was intentional, premeditated homicides, and they're still not arrested. So when I witness and actually survive these things, no matter how unbelievable my story, it's the truth. Unfortunately for me, I realize that telling the truth is actually further threatening to my own freedom and my own life because of this systematic, response that people have when I start to talk about one crime at a time. So I talk about the first crime I survived, then the second crimes, and third, and how it has just been a snowball effect. It's reality. It wasn't that these people all got together. It's that right now in our country there's so much individual, personal greed and corruption that then they get together within law enforcement to find out that, well, all these people, are willing to, take bribes or whatever. So then they get a gang together of corruption, and it just grows and grows and grows to the point where we can't, get any true law enforcement anymore, true law and order, when entire departments turn corrupt. And again, if murderers are left in our hospitals, we'll grow and grow until we've got Nazi Germany in open practice or worse in this country. Already, man, too many people, man, as far as I can tell, at least 12 million Americans have already been slaughtered in this country in the name of population control. 12 million adults. Now, we're not talking about all the millions of infants that are slaughtered every year. When we devalue human life that much, this is the inevitable response, man. That people who think that we're no better than animals and came from monkeys in their ignorance are capable of, murdering anybody that they perceive as not of value to society or for whatever reason. This is the inevitable results of the lie of evolution being taught to people. And the lack of the true knowledge that we all come from God, and that there's going to be consequences, man. Real consequences for people that live lives like these people that I've met in the recent past.
Murder or attempted murder is causing Washington state line. The acts, in which it has occurred, happened in Washington. And then it happened here in Idaho by these doctors at the...
So here he keeps going back to that it all started in Washington. But I'm telling them that I saw them with my own eyes occurring here in Idaho as well, and that they tried to do me in. I was fortunate enough to secure my release while they were well on their way to permanently committing and forcing these drugs that have killed hundreds of thousands of people already in this nation.
Freedom Medical Center, who tried basically to keep me locked up. They did their best. I didn't get released easily, and they did their best to put me on medication that would have killed me. And I'm an eyewitness that they monitor people there, and when as soon as their vitals get low enough, they send them off to the state mental institution, and the people that are suffering don't know what to do. They look at me and say, what can we do? We don't get any contact with the others. They know they're dying. They know that they're dying from the medication, and nobody's helping them. And I don't know what to do. I can't get anybody to listen to me, or I don't know who to investigate. When I go to the authorities threaten me. They say if I attempt to submit this proof, they're going to lock me up. That's what the FBI did. That's what the local authorities did. And like I said, the local authorities basically helped my wife get away with attempted homicide. But what is your proof? I mean, so far you're talking about that there's not only a bit. What is this proof? These are all medical records, all the recordings, all the eyewitness visual recordings of when I go into hospitals. I did recording and so on and so forth. Conversations. People that were normally hospital staff that worked there were tapped on shoulders by individuals that would pull up and follow them from hospital.
I mean, this is another thing that happened. I mean, there's no way that this is just, if it is, then basically hospitals have become so large entities in preserving their financial, profitabilities that they can actually hire people within their own structure or system to cover up the crimes that they're committing. Because I would walk into hospitals and it wouldn't just be, the systematic normal staff changes, because I'd walk in at different times and I'd go, oh great, I'm going to get to talk to some new individuals. And people would come in from the outside, like driving up quickly, and literally come running into like the radiology department of Bonner General, tap the existing, staff that I was talking to, and say, we'll handle this. So people would, actually be switched out while they were on duty with other persons that had already been participating and not giving me my full records, systematically altering records or deleting records, proving my allegations. If that's cost control by hospitals, like, universally occurring in this country, well then Sicko, again, the documentary by Michael Moore is just a tiny tip of the iceberg as to what they'll do to protect their profits.
The hospital and said, we'll handle this. And they would tell them to take a walk. And the whole spectrum, you're saying that people are following you from hospital to hospital. I'm saying that when I was trying to get these tests run, that there were people that don't even work at the hospital. They pull up in the parking lot where I was, go in with me basically, and right in front of me, didn't even care that I could see them, tap the even administrators, desk clerks, on their shoulders and say, we'll handle this. And basically tell them to leave, they'd sit down, and they'd know my name, everything. What was your diagnosis when you were in the mental hospital?
So here I am telling this guy that firsthand, I'm witnessing. I understand it sounds, I gotta admit, I understand that it sounds unbelievable, but it's the truth. It is the truth. And it's so frustrating, man, to have to sit there when, basically, if we really take a good look at the crimes that have been committed in this country, let's look at the monumental crime of 911. In front of the whole world, man, high treason was committed by our governing officials. And it's like, to sit there and think that there's not enough, money or clandestine operations, or how many people we've got working in government now to do what I'm saying is demonstrating the lack of knowledge about how many people are employed by our government now that is perfectly capable of doing everything I'm saying they were doing and have done in this whole thing. And yet, but to talk to somebody that is a government employee to try to get a prosecution against, corruption within the United States government on down, all the way down to a local municipality of just officers on the take, or officers that are, how do you say, so corrupt themselves they, give women, that have committed crimes, get out of jail free cards for sex acts, right? I mean, the bottom line is that it's like everything I'm saying has been documented, and I mean, people have been busted. I mean, it's not like this is like, no, this dude, but automatically when I talk about the things that, look, I'm a personal eyewitness that this happened, I get this crap, man, constantly. And it's like, what the hell are you supposed to do as a citizen? I mean, I'm serious. What can I do if I really care about the public other than what I'm doing right now, and just say, damn it, I'm telling the truth. I'm not making this up. I'm not delusional. It's like, it's not a mental case where I just decided to imagine all these things happen to me. It's like, what am I supposed to do? Just die in horrible agony quietly, and just because I don't want to deal with people, criticizing and slandering me anymore? At this point, I'm like, what have I got to lose? It's like I'm dying in horrible pain. If I can't get medical, treatment I'm requesting, short of a miracle from God Almighty, and again, I believe in miracles, and it's another reason why I'm going public. I'm hoping that there's some people out there that will compassionately realize that these people did this to me, start praying that, for the miracle that God will heal me regardless of whether or not I can get medical treatment. I mean, however I can get well again. And again, I'm not talking about, being well as far as they're concerned, like, oh, dude, you're mental, because I have a sound mind. I've been given, a spirit from God that is sound in judgment, and I'm telling the truth. I'm a minister of the gospel of Jesus Christ, and I would never lie or exaggerate these things. The best case scenario for the shrinks at NIBH, that I can't make excuses for what I saw. They know they are killing people. They do. They go to their 9-to-5 jobs. There's no way they can monitor these people's vitals, watch their vitals get worse and worse and worse, and not know they're killing them by giving them these medications. And there's no way anybody with eyeballs can see that when somebody walks in and can talk and express themselves, and the next day they can't due to the medications they're given, that they're not, doing serious damage to a person. In other words, committing aggravated assault. There's no way they don't know they are hurting and harming people. And frankly, like I said, man, I know it's difficult to believe, but Waite took sadistic pleasure in destroying people's lives and was taking pleasure in doing it to me. It wasn't like, there's just no other, course for us to take, Mr. Swenson, other than for us to prescribe that you take these medications for your own good type thing. And medications that wouldn't have lethal side effects, right? If that was a professional opinion, some type of something that could actually help a person, if they truly were requesting help. But to be forced, man, against your will to take harmful toxins, man, is, evil. That is sadistic. There's no other way around it. That is criminal. That is aggravated assault at the very least on an innocent citizen. And these people do it as a 9-to-5 job. If this type of thing is acceptable to my fellow Americans, then frankly I want to see all of you take these medications and your children and then tell me that it's okay for any citizen to have these things forced on them. I'm serious. If you're a proponent for other citizens, I don't care if you think they're mentally ill or whacked or nuts or whatever you think. If you think it's okay for substances that are so toxic that it causes permanent brain damage and permanent organ damage, I want to see you lined up with the psychoquacks and take that shit and document it on international television. And if you still have enough, how do you say, mental capability after you've ingested these things to hear you still say that you're a proponent for having these things force-fed on innocent citizens, regardless of their mental state. This is evil. I mean, there's no other, category or definition of what these people do to people. It is evil. Now, if you're, so brainwashed by the pharmaceutical companies, again, it's part of prophecy. So I'm trying to break that deception, that hold that they have. That they purposely add harmful toxic substances to medications that give other complications to your organs, so you have to take more and more pills because they're so damn greedy. Now they'll say they add those toxins because they want to purposely put in stomach upset ingredients, which are basically chemicals that have nothing to do with the benefits of whatever herb or whatever botanical or whatever root or bark that they derive the healing properties from in that ingredient. They'll say it's to prevent overdose or whatever. But the result is that people take these medications and it harms their liver or harms their kidneys or harms their pancreas, does further harm to their brain or other parts of their body, and they end up having to take one pill and then 2 pills and then 3 pills and then 4 pills until they're taking a whole cocktail of pharmaceuticals, man, to some spending tens of thousands of dollars every year in multi-billion-dollar deception that has occurred, just like the scriptures prophesied, to all of these doctors and public and everything else. And so for somebody like myself that's in the know about the reality in which we find ourselves in these days, having to be subjected to these people is a psychological torture. My freedom and life was at stake because these people are ignorant of the world in which they exist, are deceived so much so that they can't use their brain to understand there's no other explanation for themselves and everything we observe in the entire universe other than that God created it. So these secular, atheistic, psycho-shrinks, psycho-quacks are a serious threat and danger to human life. I will consider it an absolute attack on my life. I would rather go to prison. I'm serious. I'd rather go to prison than have to be subjected to these individuals again. They are sadistic, and either that or they're so ignorant and they're so deluded and so deceived and depraved that they're life-threatening in their what knowledge they think they have. Kind of like having to deal with this individual who's supposed to be a US prosecutor, that when a citizen comes forward, and I'm telling him I have evidence, I didn't even get into the fact that I photographed plates, the fact that I had, the tire track that didn't belong to my wife's vehicle on certain days where I actually caught him, the fact that, there's eyewitnesses and so on and so forth. If he could have just referred me to a department of people that he worked with to at least get the urine and hair samples tested, or even cellular samples, maybe some type, I don't know, fat cells or some type of there's got to be a way, man, or even the Kanoki foot pads to test the toxins in them to see if the ingredients that I'm saying are there, right? But the bottom line is that if all that, the evidence proves is just what happened to me in Washington, at least I can get those mass murderers locked up, right? If I can't get, people to look at the fact that in their medical reports they wanted to give me life-threatening substances to get the people here at Kootenai Medical Center locked up as well. These are criminals. If they're that ignorant, then they're guilty also of negligent manslaughter or at least some case of aggravated assault against numerous persons. Numerous counts. Which is worse? I say again, which is worse? A murderer comes up and takes your wallet, right? A crime has been committed and for which they can go to prison for years and years. Or cops, man, and federal agents falsely accusing somebody of being a drug dealer and stealing their entire estate. That type of crap's going on now. Estate theft. And then they do, if they don't, whatever they don't want to keep for themselves, then they put in government auctions and the profits are split among all the corruption. Where do you think all the money actually really goes? There is no government accountability for any of the shit that goes on in our nation, let alone the rest of the world. So some poor citizen loses his entire estate because of greedy, corrupt officials. It's way worse than being mugged. The cops, man, were so corrupt, they helped her get away with, several $100,000 at least, conservatively, of robbing me of my estate, and actually what would have resulted in, millions, if not multi-millions, of my future investment capital. And my estate, man, was completely robbed out from under me, on top of everything I've endured. So, damn straight, man, I'm gonna, take whatever risk I have to take, to get these crimes at least noticed by the public, and at least, hopefully, some that are smart enough will realize I'm telling the truth. Or at least, even if they're skeptical, start researching and then realize I'm telling the truth. For their own safety. At least, when I breathe my last, I'll have a clear conscience before God. And also not have to hang my head in shame before, all of the many true disciples of the Messiah that have gone before. But this is frustrating, though, to have to deal with this level of, unwarranted antagonism from those that are supposed to be in law enforcement and federal prosecutors and local prosecutors, just people in general, not doing their jobs, giving excuses as to why not. How many people out there, man, go to the police about, rapes or abuses, things their own family members went through, and they couldn't get any help. And it's because of an epidemic of corruption, an epidemic of laziness. In other words, people just wanting to do their jobs and go home and suck on their beers and watch TV, including in law enforcement. It's an epidemic, man, and it's a direct result of people thinking they came from monkeys as opposed from God, and that they're going to give an account of what they did with their life's journey, man, when they die. If everybody knew that, man, I guarantee, man, products and services would be at an all-time high instead of an all-time low. Our economy would be rocking. This nation would be blessed. And there wouldn't be scandal after scandal after scandal. Corruption everywhere. So I'm calling upon the decent men and women of America that I know still exist in this country and within law enforcement to help me clean up the criminals within your own ranks. Please. Frankly, I don't know what else to do. If I was healthy and I knew what I've been through is going on, if I couldn't get these people arrested with this effort, I would be seriously contemplating trying to organize perhaps what might be necessary is law enforcement, a whole law enforcement deputized citizenry to have to take on the entrenched corruption with arms if necessary. Unfortunately. And I hate violence. Hate it. I can't stand the fact when you see innocent men, women, and children blown up all over the world are still to this day stepping on mines and losing limbs. In fact, those are some of the blessings I leave. That in Yehoshua's mighty name, and I say leave, I speak into creation in Yehoshua's mighty name, that if such children have lost limbs under such circumstances, that all those limbs be restored and that they be made whole wherever they are in all the world. That God restore legs, arms, lower extremities, make their bodies completely whole to his glory, that people might know the one true God. Yehoshua loves them, and that the suffering in this world is not a result of God not paying attention or caring. It's a direct result of the fact that he's given us all free will, choices to do good or to do evil, and too many people are choosing to do evil. Too many people are selling out for pieces of paper with blood all over it. Stand up. Be men and women of integrity and honor, because the reward that comes from God in eternity is far more valuable than if you were to gain all the money in the world. Money will not buy food when no food is to be had. Money will not buy water when no water is to be had. Money will not save you in the day of his wrath. Stop worshiping money. It's not like I don't know how it sounds. But it's the truth. And I'm not going to lie about it.
A portion of our government is covering up intentional hospital homicides occurring across this nation. Now I know how to get it stopped. And I'm serious as can be. Well, I don't have any power to do anything about that. If you were to describe credibly, or even not credibly, a federal crime that occurred in jurisdiction of the state of the District of Idaho.
And I did many times, and every time I did, corrupt FBI agent covering and colluding with sex offending cops. That's federal jurisdiction. Medical practitioners across state lines covering for homicides attempts, and homicides occurring both in Washington and Idaho by corrupt medical practitioners. Even if you don't believe the following around and the license plates, even though I've got evidence that government issued plated vehicles, man, followed me around, trailing me from places to places, and you don't believe my house was bugged. I tried to keep all the phones and other artifacts that I suspected. Listening, to intimate moments, and then resulting somehow, following that, a whole bunch of, like she boasted of some 24 officers participating in sex acts, and that there was no way I was going to be able to get her prosecuted because they all, were basically going to cover for one another, lie for one another. I mean, I know how what I'm saying sounds, but because it has in fact happened, I mean, I don't care that I'm risking my reputation and everything. Risking further discrediting and further attacks on my freedom and life by the same corruption that has already made all this possible in the first place. Because I can't tolerate it. And because ultimately I know I have to give an account to God for why I didn't do my best, my very best, to make sure this doesn't happen to anybody else. These people, man, have lost their minds with abuse of authority and public trust. And I want them brought up, put in check, should have been yesterday, by the people in this country that are still full of God's Spirit and still have a sense of righteous indignation about something as atrocious as what I've endured, still am suffering from. Now I can't even get pain mitigation if I wanted it, pain medication or some type of actually competent medical care because of the entrenched corruption and the entrenched ignorance of atheistic individuals that don't even have enough sense of rational thought and logic to conclude that there must be a God, which is sad. It means I'm in a world of essentially insane, irrational creatures that are life-threatening to me and themselves and everybody else around them, and they don't even realize it. But Exhibit A, look at the world today. People thinking it's okay to spend trillions of dollars blowing up the world and making the world a living hell on earth. Saying, let's exterminate this country, and let's displace millions of people, and let's blow up innocent men, women, and children, and let's tear babies limb from limb. Hell, we can make a lot of money, man, tricking them into slaughtering their own progeny. The greed, man, is so completely pervasive. I mean, they don't even have to try to find volunteers, man, to take money when there's so much oppression and suffering in the world. They can just offer somebody, a nominal, sum of cash to basically murder anybody. Because people have lost the sense of value of human life by slaughtering infants and being told they came from monkeys. And they're acting like it. They're living like it. The whole world's being inundated with this type of mentality. And the horrible thing is these people in their arrogance actually think they're intelligent. And it's like, man, they're so challenged, man. Clunk, clunk, clunk. I've been there. It causes you to lose your senses. I know, I've been there. While realizing that everything I've been taught could offer no true, sound reason for the existence of the universe or myself, I still could not make the leap that there must be a God. So I understand. And the whole reason why I couldn't make that leap, when I knew as a little kid there was one and communed with them nightly, the whole reason was because I'd been so thoroughly brainwashed, which is cruel beyond words, man, what these people do to little kids in our public schools.
Yeah, maybe I could call the FBI and get them to look into it. Okay, that's what happened yet. Okay, if conspiracy to commit homicide crosses state lines, that's not a problem. We haven't even come close to offering any convincing proof of that. Well, you've given me your opinion.
I had the proof in my hands. He was saying that this conversation is over. He didn't want to look at it. I had the proof in my hands. He didn't want to look at it. Instead, he was just convinced, man, that he was dealing with somebody mental. So it was a waste of his time to even, try to look at what I had with me in my hands.
That your wife conspired with some unnamed medical people. I asked you what the connection or the nexus is between your wife and those people, and you didn't offer anything.
Yes, I did. I told him point blank that, first of all, in the hospitals, they already are murdering people for their organs. So it didn't have to be an actual connection. The connection is just corruption and greed. But second of all, and the reason I didn't go into the visions from Almighty God was he was already concluding that I was mental. Was that the Lord himself showed me that they conspired over the life insurance when it would pay out for them to each get $50,000 apiece. So it's about the money. What are most crimes about, man?
That you were sleeping with the cops who you talked to
Vice,
after it happened.
selfishness, lust, greed. It's always the same ultimate motivations.
They pulled her aside whenever we went in for pre-screening consultation for some reason.
So here I tell him.
Out of the room. I don't know why. To talk with her privately. I suspect it was because they discovered that she was poisoning me. And I think that they told her that, she was either looking at time in prison or that they could help her. But the absurdity of this is that you're alive. And if you have this...
In other words, if I died, maybe I could have gotten an investigation. I don't want to end up dead in order to get people to do their damn jobs. When I'm telling them a first-hand eyewitness of these events. It's like somebody that, survives, man, heinous crimes of mass murders and rape. There's a few people that actually get away. They run or they fight back or somehow they actually survive and get away. and how they're treated, man, by law enforcement, saying, well, if they wanted you dead and stuff, they'd killed all these other people, you'd have been dead. And just automatically thinking that there'd never be anyone that would actually get away and survive. As I have.
If they want you dead, you were completely incapacitated. They'd have made you dead and collected the money and gone away.
So he's saying if they wanted me dead, they could have just, finished me off while I was anesthetized. They tried to. They gave me the blood transfusion while I was still anesthetized, coming out after surgery, telling the nurse, hey nurse, he's apparently lost so much blood during surgery, he needs, 3 units. So the nurse had already given me 2 units, and I was waking up, I was watching her giving me the 3rd and final unit, and she started telling me that that's exactly what she was doing. When she said, oh, negative blood, in my thoughts I was going, oh no. And then immediately I went into shock. And my only other memories after that were, sitting up because I was suffocating and I couldn't breathe into the huge tube in my throat, so I was trying to pull the tube out. And they're like, hold him down, and put him out. Because I woke up again, from basically suffocating. So it wasn't like they weren't trying to kill me while I was out. They did. So then, after being, successfully put out again and tied down hands and feet on the gurney with the tube down my throat, they wheeled me into another room because the people that actually were there forcing them to resuscitate me the first time left. Because, again, I was successfully resuscitated the first time. And it was done, like he's saying that, they would just automatically be able to get away with it. Hospitals are groups of large people and entities now. I mean, they're large structures. So what I'm saying that the Lord showed me, that people that weren't in on the homicide attempts actually were in the hall when I coded and came running in to offer assistance, so they had to actually look like they were caring about my life and had to resuscitate me, is the truth. They tried to murder me. People that weren't in on it forced them to resuscitate me, so then they wheeled me into a second room, all dark and quiet, and then just 2 of them were there. A heavy set, shorter, female nurse, and a male nurse that stood on the left side of my gurney, and they shut the machines off intentionally. The fluids, man, filled my lungs as a result of the intubation tube being shut off, the breathing apparatus, and I suffocated to death a second time. And before that, I was banging as hard as I could with my fingers and my feet on the rails, hoping I could make enough noise. At first I thought they just didn't realize that I wasn't being able to breathe. But when she goes, acting like a wild man won't save you now, and he starts laughing, then I was banging as hard as I could with my fingers and feet, hoping somebody was outside the room or nearby that could hear and help me, because I couldn't shout for help because of the tube down my throat. When the machines code, I don't know if it's linked to, throughout the hospital, but I do know they make an alarm type sound when somebody flatlines. And the Lord showed me that not only did somebody come the first time that wasn't in on the homicide attempt, but the second time as well. And that's basically because I committed the keeping of my soul into His hands, that He made sure that people came in on both occasions, and I survived 2 homicide attempts at Deaconess Medical Center. And it was brought on by an incompatible blood transfusion that all 3 doctors, man, respected doctors, at least people respect the office of doctors, committed. And they lie about in the medical report, and I have proven that. Just that alone, man, should render an investigation, but instead people want to say, well, that's just malpractice, I'm like, not when they altered the transfusion permission form, not when they coerced me to sign organ donor form immediately prior to being anesthetized for surgery, This was premeditation. And then, even if they don't believe that was, then it's called that malpractice, because they did lie, and I've shown they lied, they sent me home with incompatible blood transfusion, untreated, undiagnosed, to die. 80% of people in that condition die. And I've suffered, and when I've gone to doctor after doctor after doctor, telling them why I'm suffering, then all of them would either do what this guy's doing, automatically go, oh, you're just depressed, or you're mental, or this or that, or whatever. And they wouldn't even look at the medical lab report that I'm showing the world now. I'm having to show the world because of this entrenched corruption. And it was either done intentionally or because, again, there's just so much ignorance that it's now become life-threatening, truly life-threatening. That it is extremely difficult to find kind, caring, compassionate, intelligent professionals anywhere in any field anymore. I mean, even when you go to restaurants, it's hard to, I mean, there's, I don't want to insult, people all over the world now, or throughout my country. But the bottom line is, tips to ensure proper service used to mean proper service. Nowadays, man, it's like, really hard to get proper service. They don't even know how to give proper service. I go into, maybe not even necessarily fine dining. Heck, when I was growing up, I was in a restaurant. It wasn't a fine dining experience. It might have been one of the nicer places in town. But man, I provided, lemon bowls, for the fingers after meals, so people could, clean their fingers, and napkins. And if people wanted, the napkin set, I would set. If they wanted, a light, I'd provide a light. If they wanted the time, bam, time. Whatever it was, full service, man. I mean, with a smile. Never, man, did they ever have to ask for a refill on their beverages. It was just an automatic. You just assumed people were thirsty until they either put their plate over their glass or their napkin, or somehow indicated that they were done eating and drinking. But nowadays, it's a whole different thing. They constantly having to wave them down, constantly, having to, try to get their attention. And they're gone. I mean, I've had such a hard time finding good service anywhere, man. Frankly, I'm surprised they don't have schools, man. I know they do for 5-star dining, right? But the bottom line is like, it doesn't matter what it is, And I'm not saying I don't meet kind, courteous people all the time. I'm just saying as far as the level of professional training in all fields, man, when we start teaching people in our schools that they came from monkeys, it's a systematic dumbing down of our society that then also erodes values. So we get, constant employee theft, which hikes prices for law-abiding citizens that have to pay more because the corporations don't suffer. Instead, they just raise prices on all their products and services. So, in other words, the epidemic of crime and corruption, and lack of values, because we're no longer teaching the Bible in our public schools, which was the very purpose of our public education system, because we've departed from God, is getting so bad that it's just, everywhere problematic. And when it happens to go into medical care and law enforcement, now we've got real serious problems. Too many people wanting to profit off, all the illegal drug trade, and we even get sex slavery. We get missing. You realize how many people go missing? I forget. It's an outrageous quantity. I'm not going to throw the number out because I can't remember it right off the top of my head. About how many people go missing every day now, not just in this country but around the world, and that are typically, certain types of and certain ages of women, or even little kids, man, being sold into sex slavery. It's astonishing, and it's horrible, man. Horrible. I gotta do my best, man, to turn back the tide of darkness, man, that is sweeping the world, man, in these last days. And I want my brothers and sisters, man, imbued with the power of the Spirit of the Holy Ghost given in Yehoshua's mighty name all over the world, so that with great boldness and courage they do supernaturally, that the supernatural works of Christ, man, are once again so overtly manifest that not even the secular media can deny any longer the divine.
Nurses are walking down the hall, doctors are walking down the hall, probably people that weren't involved, and they come rushing in, and it's like, they have to look like they're resuscitating me. So they resuscitate me. The second time they bring me into a separate room that's supposed to be private, but once again, when the machine goes off and stuff, it makes a code noise that goes to the administrators and so on and so forth, and anybody that's in there is supposed to respond, and so they resuscitate me a second time. The third time, I actually heard the nurses in the hospital saying they're trying to kill this one, and stood guard, basically watched me until I was wheeled to a entirely different section of the hospital, and no longer in the ICU, no longer in critical care, where I recovered, where I actually had the chills from the acute pain.
All nurses and doctors that are aware hospital homicides are occurring, I ask you, man, at this time to go public, man. Stand up. These atrocities must stop.
Could have tried, like most people, to handle this civilly, but in my opinion, the hospital, at least if they could say they might say the first one was accidental, even though they doctored up the transfusion prevention form, even though 3 weeks earlier when I wrote on it, they were all upset. Okay. We're going to conclude this. Okay. If anything, you have a civil case, that you may have a statute of limitations problem. I'm not an expert on what the Washington State statute of limitations is. 2 years. Okay. How about, I have not heard you come close to describing any criminal offense. How about the house rounded my life that basically my wife told me this story that because I was medically ill to basically put claim all of our real property and most of our possessions into her when she moves into another house. And then because I'm a minister, she knew that if she committed adultery that would be cause for a real divorce. So it's like, so then shortly after that, she lets me know that she's basically sleeping with the cops and there's nothing I can do about it, and basically rubbing my nose in the fact that that's horrible. I'm sorry that happened. But what I'm getting at is that the cops have
have to let murderers go, and he's like that's not doesn't require federal prosecution across state lines.
Evidence of the attempted homicide. I still haven't heard it. But the evidence of the attempted homicide told me you thought she was poisoned, but there isn't any proof of that. Okay, I have, like I said, I have the urine samples from the time in question during the years that she was poisoned. You don't suppose when you were in the hospital they ran a test on your urine and that whole screening stuff that they're toxic that? I believe that they did.
They ran a tox screen on my blood. They took blood samples prior to surgery.
It's not that incredible. I can tell you that when it comes to proving something beyond a reasonable doubt, I mean, we couldn't prove it to the 20-yard line, much less the 99-yard line. You couldn't prove it that you can prove that they're lying about the blood transfusion, and they're lying about the blood transfusion, and it's in Washington. Yeah, I understand that, but when
You kept ignoring the fact that I kept saying that doctors on this side of things had committed, equal crimes, grievous crimes, and had covered up for the doctors in Washington, which involves federal prosecution.
If there's a conspiracy to commit a murder in Washington, these doctors that treated you years later or months later had nothing to do with that because they didn't know you when it happened. Exactly.
He's saying they didn't know what happened, and he ignored my testimony saying that I tried to tell them in order to get medical care. They did know what happened.
How are they going to think they're mentally ill? I mean, that's the impression I get, and I'm just a layperson. Right? Right, I understand that. And what I'm getting at is that we now have several years worth of FDA hearings on complaints about these newly approved psychotropics causing deaths, suicides, homicides, etc., etc. In other words, for a sane society, you still put on the market things like aspartame or whatever and stuff, and
You know what I'm getting at? How many people want to make excuses, man? Including, federal prosecutors for crimes that are occurring, across this country now. Hundreds of thousands of people dying, man, because of something. And there's like, some people shouldn't, It's like I said, man, it's like...
I think you had a horrible experience. I completely empathize with you on that. In terms of describing the crime that I have any jurisdiction over, I haven't heard you even get close. Okay, where do I go? If law enforcement, actually aids, like what happened with my wife, to get the forensics done to prove Ace tried poisoning, she's actually got full records and so on and so forth. People know that she's been sleeping with the cops. And then I actually reported these crimes. And that they basically have helped her defraud me of my estate and our property. And the whole reason why she's not arrested in jail is because this cop, at least one of them, knew that they could profit by, I have a community property state. So half of whatever you accrued during your marriage is yours and half is hers. That's really simple.
Not when there's attempted homicides involved.
While I was bedridden and so sick that I couldn't work and couldn't feed myself, she basically just said, well, look.
And not when, it's in a false state where adultery, massive adulteries have occurred.
And then that way, so she did that at fraud. Sure. That's a private matter. Did you have an attorney when you got divorced? No. She told me that if I hired an attorney or if I made her get an attorney or fire her in any way, shape, or form, I'm going, I'm super sick. I mean, I was so sick, I thought I'd die in a day. I couldn't handle it. Corn, I was done with that. This was the final, the divorce was finalized in July of 2007, just last year. You still might want to, if there was fraud in the inducement, you still might want to talk to a good lawyer. How much money is involved in the estate? It's probably now less than $700,000 or $700,000. That's a lot of money. And how much of it did you get? Nothing. I mean, right now, my house that I'm in has been sold at the trustee sale. I'm basically a homeless person. I mean, I don't know what to do. I mean, the reason I'm here is that sheer desperation and everything that's happened to me and not knowing who to go to see. Well, I obviously am not, I don't know, but I'm not looking at you. I'm looking backwards. You're looking backwards. You're looking at the past, not at the future, or even the present. It seems to me that you do have some mental health issues, that you're seeing conspiracies. You're telling me all these people are conspiring with one another, and that's a pretty incredible story.
Incredible or not, if the conspiracy is the case, his office would have been having jurisdiction. And that's why I was there.
If they wanted you dead, you'd be dead. They did their best. I'm a minister. I pray, and I believe God brought somebody down the hall that, although what had happened to me since, which is pretty much this, is, in my opinion, like I would rather go to heaven because of the many people thinking I'm a mental case when I'm telling the truth. And it's like, the hardest thing for me about all this is not what's happened to me. The hardest thing for me about all this is that I know these people are getting away with this. Not just me, but on a regular basis. And I wish people, the doctors and the nurses in the hospitals and in the mental ward, they are intentionally giving lethal doses, not like right away so somebody gets a big instantly. They monitor them over a period of time so they can document that their health decline and then they cure the dynamic. And their reason for doing that is what? Well, when I contacted the U.S. Attorney General, and I know you're going to give me, but I recorded it. I contacted the U.S. Attorney General's office about this. That's where we are now. Yeah, but I mean, in Washington.
Washington, D.C.
When I started having government vehicles following me and everything else,
His office is the US Prosecutor. I visited the U.S. Attorney General's office the day before. I wasn't saying his office was guilty. I'm saying, that clandestine agents within the United States government are covering up hospital homicides. And if not, why did they not arrest the nationally publicized mass murderers, man, during Katrina? And why am I getting such grief when I have enough evidence to warrant a serious investigation? I mean, it's a slight possibility that cost control between hospitals, like say for instance, I don't know, say for instance all these hospitals are maybe owned by one insurance company or one insurance entity or one corporation or something, right? But, when my records from Arizona were also altered, and when the Katrina mass murders went free, and when I talked with other patients that say that in California these things are going on in other states, even Nevada, and when I witnessed crimes down in Arizona, or first-hand testimonies from other victims, that when you start to see it nationwide, what happens is you have to come to the conclusion that when our government funds, and supports Planned Parenthood and, incites wars around the world and basically recruits, man, from the poorest of the populace and intentionally sponsors, man, a completely fallacious, unfounded religion in our public schools, and when you start looking at all of the evidence, the satanic symbolism, man, on our money and within the government structure of the Capitol, of the Pentagon, and when they've got people coming forward that personally witnessed satanic rituals occurring within our governing officials, family members talking about practicing Satanists within the military. When you start talking about first-hand testimony, and you start to just, after a while, the evidence just starts to stack up. That we have policies of death, and basically when you get a recording that says it's a form of population management, and then when you find out that other governments around the world have been caught on the media, governing officials higher up, or powerful entities or representatives of powerful entities saying that there's a serious population burden to the world now, and that their opinion is that most of mankind is a cancer, and that the population needs to be decreased to about 500 million globally, and things like this. When these are people that are influential in politics all over the planet, then you start to see, man, that just like the scriptures would say that the final, rise of the Antichrist would be dark and terrible in days of great tribulation, that we are, at the brink, man, of, mass chaos and destruction if the people of God don't join together now, pray, and pull their head out of the clouds about this mythical fantasy about how, we want to think our nation is, quite a bit better than it is, and the people within it. We have got to hold our governing officials accountable right now and turn back the stem of tide of open satanic, man, takeover of our country by people that are elitist, eugenic fascists, and actually practicing Satanists. Many times, man, our politicians, man, have been caught, man, flashing satanic hand symbols, the same symbols like the Son of Sam and other mass murderers flash. It's true, man. And again, I'm going to be showing all that to Kurt. Now, I know that sounds like, but if people in one hospital tried to murder you, and then people in another hospital tried to murder you, and then people that maybe are just so damn ignorant, they just take away your freedom even though you haven't committed any crimes. And then people that are so ignorant, they think it's okay to give you permanent, chemical brain damage and lobotomizers. And then, cops so damn corrupt, they, rather, have their dick sucked than arrest murderers and mass murderers and enable estate theft and so on and so forth. Even if, again, I'm not saying they got together all in the first place and plotted and planned this whole thing out. I'm just saying that as a result, man, of personal greed and corruption everywhere, including government, that we're now, as citizens, we're all beginning to suffer, and it's going to get worse, man. And that my suffering, the hell I've been through, on account of so much personal greed and corruption being so pervasive in our culture now, is something nobody should have to endure, man, on planet Earth. Nobody. I was watching a documentary recently about all these murders that were going down in Juarez, just over the border in Mexico. And some of them were testifying that the cops, man, were involved and knew. And that's the reason why a lot of them were going unsolved. A bunch of young women, man, ending up sexually abused and dead. So I'm getting at, man, and then others were testifying that, the cops were completely complicit into how much, drugs come across our borders, man. And it's been busted over and over again, man. Customs and so on and so forth. What was it? That guy, George Lopez or something, one of the largest, cocaine dealers ever busted in the history of our country. He was so used to corruption, man, and whenever he'd, get accosted by officials, he would just ask them how much. He believed that there was no way he would ever go to prison because everybody he'd ever met just automatically took bribes. These are factual, historical events, well documented. So when I say, man, I'm suffering because of personal greed and corruption on a monumental scale, I shouldn't be met with that kind of maltreatment, man. It's not like I'm saying all these people got together, plotted and planned, man, like, let's brutally torture Michael and leave him to suffer horribly, and let's all join in and try to kill him, although a bunch of people did. Instead, I'm saying that there's just so much personal greed and corruption that it becomes inevitably freedom and life-threatening. And then there's so much pervasive ignorance because of the dumbing down of our education that there's people that are completely oblivious that these things are going on and won't even take the time to listen to those of us that have taken the time to research. And it's mainly because, of personal tragedies that we are either that or journalists that are actually have a conscience. Like people like Moyers or something. They actually have a conscience of what's going on in our country, or like Amy in Democracy Now! At any rate, I frankly think that the public in America must, stop choosing to remain willfully ignorant, thinking that that's somehow going to protect you or save you or make, your children safe. We have to demand government accountability when corruption gets this bad. Have to. And I hope it's not going to take a second revolution to get this nation back on track. And I hope it's going to take men and women of God at praying and participating to turn this nation back around to its godly heritage and make sure the devil man cannot use the United States resources and blessings that God gave because we were faithful for a long period of time as a nation to him for evil. Let us not, man, be idle at this time when such serious threats to our freedoms and our safeties are not just on the horizon, not coming maybe, 100 years from now, but are systematically, man, right now in danger of making sure that men and women of God, not just their freedoms, but their lives are in serious jeopardy. No one should endure for any reason the things I've endured. Back to back to back. And again, by so many people, man, either being coerced by corruption or bribed by corruption, or just they already were corrupt in their own selfishness. And then just flat out ignorance because people believe the lies they were taught in schools. So this effort, man, is not just fighting for, my life and the life of others on the physical way, and not just fighting for good, kind, competent, medical care that's fair, man, and practical. Because right now, as far as I'm concerned, at least as far as I can tell in America, there is no such thing. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't, excellent physicians here, there, and everywhere. But for a citizen to have to, go through 100 of them or so, whether seriously ill or even deathly ill, is pure torture. Pure torture. By referral after referral after referral when it's not necessary in the 21st century. I hope people will take my suggestions, man, seriously, and take a good look at them. I can't see how anybody would argue with, not or fail to realize that would be the very best care we can offer, each individual, is a universal database of all known experts in every field relating to every known symptomology of every known illness, so that diagnosis is quickly forthcoming instead of this runaround from physician to specialist to more and more tests and trying to find, each and every one of those opinions, and maybe eventually you might get a correct diagnosis these days, maybe. And also my effort about making, aware of the fact that this genetic trait, man, affects 1 in 10% of the global population, man, suffering, man, needlessly, and all because of a lack of knowledge. And then to have to, deal with, hearing that crap, which is, when you go to the Wilson site, they say you need to come to an expert center if you suspect you have it, because this is exactly what they find happens, is that quacks out there just don't know enough to know better, and the general populace, so then you start, being, tortured with false accusations when you're actually trying to get decent medical care.